We are live from our respective studios spread across the greater Baltimore, Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, all across Maryland. I'm Nick Redding. I'm the Executive Director of Preservation Maryland, coming to you from Frederick County, Maryland. And I'm joined by Megan Bacco, who is joining us from the city of Baltimore, and joined by Ellie Cowan, who is also joining us from the city of Baltimore. And so tonight we want to talk a little bit about where we've been over the past year. It's actually been an incredibly eventful year, given the fact that most of us have not seen each other in person since March, or have only seen each other in person very briefly since then. And we've still gotten a lot done, and there's been successes, there's been losses, but I think that there's a lot that the preservation community in general should be proud of. And what I'm hoping we can do tonight is talk a little bit about all those things, and not just hear from me, but also hear from two of my colleagues in the organization who have been engaged on all of these various fronts. So I think we said that we were supposed to talk about why we're preservationists or something like that to kick it off. And I think I'm a preservationist. I could answer this in 1,000 different ways, but I think I'm a preservationist because growing up, there was always a real strong sense of history in our family, and got to hear about our ancestors and the struggles that they went through, and had a real profound sense that, you know, we were part of history, and that I suppose someday I will be part of history. So good or bad. Yeah, I think that spells it out for me, but I'll kick it over to Megan Bacco, our Director of Communications.
Hey everybody, so I'm Megan. I've been with the organization for over 5 years now, and it's just been great to see the growth of the organization, especially, you know, among our colleagues and other statewide, and all the partners that we have state and nationally just get to work with the best people. So I guess my role in preservation is, obviously we're all really proud of our work. And so I'll try and shout it from the rooftops. So either through social media, here on Facebook Live, or newsletters, or events, or really cool invitations that we just love to send. We always hope whatever we put out is what we call refrigerator worthy. So if you're not already connected to us, there's a ton of ways to, please make sure you're signed up for our emails and our invitations and newsletters and things like that. Among like the projects that I work with Nick and Ellie on, we have major state and national projects. So maybe you've heard of either Six to Fix, or Campaign for Historic Trades, or our podcast, PreserveCast. So I basically try and make sure all of those things kind of come together, they make sense to our audience, and that they're supportive of our programs. So why do I do that? Why am I the Director of Communications at Preservation Maryland? I have a degree in planning, and I have a degree in preservation, and I studied in Charleston. And I was a practitioner for a short time in Buffalo, which is where I grew up. But I've always been on like the public facing side of things. So either it's community meetings, or advocacy, or the person who volunteered to make the brochure and the website and things like that. So I really find my role somewhere between knowing the content of preservation and then really wanting to communicate it out to the world. And the reason that I want to communicate it is because it speaks to me directly. I really believe that preservation and the ethics and tools of preservation make for a very interesting, creative, sustainable life and world that is applicable. Obviously, we're learning from the past, but I truly believe that it has impact in the present. And that's really why, even though it has a lot to do with history, I think for me, it has a lot to do with place. So those field trips that we all took, you know, or Sunday drives we took with our family, I think about the history and I think about the place as well.
Yeah, and Megan and I should also probably disclose that we're both Buffalonians.
So when you hear that accent from both of them,
so.
You might hear it from me. I might have picked up a little.
Buffalo raises great preservationists.
It's true.
It's true.
It is
so
true.
We're going to kick it over now to Ellie Cowan, who is our Director of Advocacy.
Yes.
So
yes, my name is Ellie Cowan. I'm the Director of Advocacy. And I've been with the organization for over 6 years now. It's sort of incredible. And I've worn many different hats, as one does when you work at a smaller nonprofit. But the position that I'm in now as Director of Advocacy, I think it actually answers my question as for why I'm a preservationist. You know, my degree is in history. My interest has always been in history. My father's parents were immigrants from Germany in the 30s. And so there's always been this strong sense of the fact that the past isn't just in the past, and that, you know, it affects us now in the present. And so with advocacy, I really get to extol the virtues of historic preservation and our smart growth work, not only for the present, but for the future. And, you know, I think we're really lucky at Preservation Maryland because I think we're all very like-minded in what our view of historic preservation is. And it's actually, you know, I think broader than very many people when they first hear historic preservation, you tend to think of something very specific. It's usually, you know, reenactments or something like that, which are awesome. But I think we work so hard through our communications, through some of the work that, you know, we'll be talking about later tonight. We really work to make preservation for all people, to tell all stories or as many stories as we can, and to really utilize it for the future of all Marylanders and to make our future better. And I think our work with our Smart Growth Maryland program really shows that. But I think that our true historic preservation work does that as well, because if we're not saving it for future generations, then who are we saving it for? And so intrinsically, we are saying that there's some value to that in the future. So, you know, that's sort of the highbrow answer to that. Plus, I just think, you know, history's pretty cool. So there's that too.
Yeah, and I think you get a sense from hearing from all of us that people are central to what resonates with each of us. I think, you know, whether it be family stories or Megan's trips, you know, in car rides with family, seeing places, experiencing place, you know, Ellie's family story, and thinking about how we use these places to make people's lives better. And that really, I mean, like, if you can do that, if you can use historic places and cool history or tough history or difficult history, whatever type of history it is, you can use that to make someone's life better, then, you know, you're doing something good. And that's hopefully what we're doing here. So speaking of good things, I figured we would kick off the true meat of the year in review with the top stories. And these are I guess the successes, the proud stories of 2020. And I think it's good for everyone to take a pause every once in a while in 2020 and remember that there are some good things still happening. And I am going to lead off with our historic property redevelopment project in Hagerstown, which I'm personally very proud of. We did a little, you know, get together yesterday, the three of us sort of thinking through, okay, what are we going to talk about? What are our top things? And I said, like, well, 417 North Jonathan Street for me is something that I'm both personally and professionally very proud of, because I think it brings together all those things that we were just talking about, the role of preservation and making place better and improving the lives of people, of giving people a sense of hope and purpose and pride in the places in which they live. And this little cabin, this, you know, 800 square foot cabin, is doing some of those things. So this building was built of recycled timbers. It was built in the 1730s. The timbers came from some point in the 18th century. And it has stood the test of time. It has been a place, I think it was quoted in the Baltimore Sun saying that this is the place where the rest of the story of Hagerstown unfolded. This is where the janitors, the mechanics, the carpenters, those, you know, the people who made the rest of the story possible, this is where they lived. And it's a place that otherwise would have been lost. It was going to be demolished. we had jump-started a property redevelopment program, and we're in a position and had really good local partners in Reggie Turner and Terrence Moore and others in the city who stepped in, along with the Habitat for Humanity of Washington County, who's a partner in it now. And we're responsible for rehabilitating it. And then at the end of the day, once it's rehabilitated, Habitat for Humanity is going to identify a qualified buyer. We're going to put it in the hands of somebody who needs a home. So we're saving history. We're making the future better. We're catalyzing redevelopment in a community that desperately needs it. It speaks to all the things that preservation can and should be. And I hope that it's the first of many projects. And I will also say, cool thing is it's the first building we've bought as an organization in 45 years. So we're going to be 90 years old next year. So it's been almost half of our time that we have not purchased a building. And so, it speaks to where our board is, it speaks to where our staff is, it speaks to our funders. And hopefully it's the first of many wins like this, and hope to break ground. I've been asked before, what does break ground mean on a rehab project? But I hope to turn over a shovel and start fixing things some point in the new year. We're just working through the final estimating, and hopefully we'll have the permits back soon. And it's a real project. It's and we've had very generous support from donors all across the country for this one. So hard to look at that as anything but a success. And it might seem like it's hard to follow a story like that, but I think in an equal way, I know the topic Megan's going to cover is equally as important and something we should all be very proud about. So maybe you want to talk about that one, Megan.
Yeah, I would love to. So that is definitely a Nick's report there. Field report is definitely a bricks and mortar story, and like a pure preservation project. And it just feels really cool to be part of a team that can have that like building by building impact. And so it's just great to see. And obviously Nick's really proud of it too. So, and it's just been great. One of the projects that I want to highlight is probably somewhere on a different side of the spectrum. It is a massive public history project. It is a statewide public history project the focus is an underrepresented community, the LGBTQ community of Maryland. So Preservation Maryland led creating a group of stakeholders, academic, community members, other preservation organizations, and basically kickstarted what is only the second in the nation of a statewide LGBTQ historic research context study. Kentucky was the first state to do it, so props to them. And of course, major cities like New York and Los Angeles also do. And it's been just a great project of a huge scope. And as many people know, obviously there have always been, and there always will be, LGBTQ people in Maryland. I think it's also no secret that it's omitted from the historic record. And that's something that this project and lots of Preservation Maryland projects, whether it's labor history, women's suffrage, or Underground Railroad, which I'll talk about later too, is about expanding those boundaries of public history. And so what I'll really say about the report, and actually I have it here because that's how proud of it I am that I keep it right here, is that it really is a social study of a group of people, of Marylanders, and society's reflection and response to them making a living and living their lives. So it's really just it's the other side of the same coin of the history of Maryland that we've always been telling and deserves to be told. So we had an opportunity to work with one of the best LGBTQ history specific researchers out there, Dr. Susan Ferentinos. She does a lot of work for the National Park Service and different districts for them, and also works on National Historic Landmark applications for LGBTQ projects. So she was just a treasure to work with, super smart, and dug into Maryland history like no other. So she's responsible for the major narrative of the project. We also were able to bring on a young, awesome librarian, Ben Eagerman, who poured through
everything.
Thank you. I'm thinking of examples. I mean, I never want to start with police blotters, but that's what always comes to mind. Like LGBTQ history is often difficult history. It's also really fun, interesting cultural history. Like, I think it just kind of runs the gamut. So Ben, researched and looked through everything, and he created an awesome map of over 300 places with LGBTQ significance, and you can jump on that from our website. Everywhere from churches, call centers, houses, places where there were protests, places where there were parades. I mean, it's just an awesome history. It's really a must read, in my opinion, just to get a context of how people in Maryland treat each other through legislation, through regulations, through, it's just a very interesting history, and long has been needed to be illuminated. One of the other cool parts of the projects, I just want to highlight a couple, are that we had crowdsourcing meetings in every corner of the state. And our most attended ones were not in Baltimore City, and they were not in Annapolis. They were in Salisbury, and they were in Frederick. LGBTQ history is a urban history, it's a suburban history, it's a rural history. And some of the properties that we're now going to be able to put on the National Register because of this project represent that. So that some of them will be rural properties or suburban properties, and some will be more urban residential properties. So we made sure to get out and reached out to the community. And another cool thing is this project is state funded and state supported. So our partners at the Maryland Historical Trust gave us a grant to do this. They've given us ongoing guidance. And then, as I kind of mentioned before, we were able to put the report into immediate practice. So working with our partners in Montgomery County Planning Department and with Baltimore's Planning and Preservation Department, basically immediately start working on state and national register listings. So not only do we have that research is being used for actual planning and preservation of these sites. So the project is pretty well documented. I guess that's part of my communications job. So you can access the map and the report and everything all at presmd.org/LGBTQ.
It's a fantastic, feather in the cap for the organization, but beyond just for the organization, it's fantastic for the state of Maryland to have that information. And, we did an interview on a completely different topic with somebody on PreserveCast this year, and he said that something critical to history moving forward is being able to see yourself reflected in it, no matter who you are. And I know Megan said something like that, and it was a beautiful quote in our press release. And Megan's obviously not going to quote themselves, but in this situation, but it was basically to that point as well, that it's important to see yourself reflected in history. And I think as an organization, if we can do that and broaden the tent of who can see themselves in Maryland history, because if you look hard enough, we're all there in one way or the other. So just terribly proud of that. So we've got bricks and mortar, we've got public history and survey and research, and now we're going to move over to like the third leg of the stool that holds Preservation Maryland up, advocacy and policy, right? Because if you can't, if you can't physically buy the building but if you document it and then you don't have any policy in place to protect it, then the stool doesn't stand. So Ellie is intimately involved in a lot of different advocacy efforts, but I know that there's one that you're proud of because it kind of pulled together all these disparate pieces in one of the communities that we're working in.
So this year was strange and different for everybody, but especially for those of us who work in policy, especially at the state level with, session ended early, everything going virtual, including all hearings and things like that at the local level. And so there was there was a learning curve, and every county did it differently. So it was, I'm really proud that we were able to bring two pieces of legislation in Frederick County across the finish line. Through our Smart Growth Maryland program, we work at the local county level with our Smarter Growth Alliances in Frederick County, in Charles County, Howard County, Anne Arundel County, and Calvert County. where we've had a presence there. And that work mostly focuses on the development of comprehensive plans. So at the county level, counties plan out 10 years ahead, basically for what they want the county to look like, what their goals are for the next 10 years of growth for a county. And so as preservationists and smart growth activists, being involved in those conversations and making sure that good goals are set and good policy is put into those comprehensive plans is very important. And so Kimberly Brandt, who unfortunately left us right as the lockdown happened, she got out, and is working for Frederick County, actually in the implementation of their comprehensive plan, Livable Frederick. She did a lot of the legwork, and so I was very proud to be able to carry on her work in Frederick. And the first piece of legislation was updates to the county's forest resource ordinance. So we and our partners in the Smarter Growth Alliance worked very hard in ensuring that the county put in policy that would ensure that in one of the fastest growing and expanding and developing counties, there were protections in place to keep what makes Frederick County, so special. And a lot of that is its natural environment and its forests. You take a drive out, to South Mountain, and what do you notice? It's the trees. So a forest resource ordinance is a way to ensure that as development progresses, trees and forests are still protected. And what advocates were able to do in Frederick is to get this forest resource ordinance passed unanimously. That has a 1-to-1 replanting ratio. So that's a no net loss. So when a developer takes on a parcel to build, if they bring down, for every acre of trees they bring down, they have to replant a full acre of that. Also in there is a 2-to-1 replanting to cut ratio if said developer actually goes overboard and brings down more than they're allowed to. So this is a really no net loss legislation. The state passed the statewide version of a Forest Conservation Act. And so this Frederick legislation not only brings the county up to par with the state, but it actually goes beyond that. And it really sets Frederick as a leader in forest conservation in Maryland. And what makes Frederick interesting too is that they passed a companion zoning piece of legislation that actually goes so far as to help enforce a lot of this. And so not only does it help prioritize forests and other ecologically vulnerable areas from upzoning, so allowing those areas to be overdeveloped. But there's also a really interesting historic preservation piece. And I think this shows how a lot of the smart growth work and our historic preservation work in tandem, is that now, because of this piece of zoning legislation, developers who are taking on a new zoning for a subdivision have to present in their application. They have to identify any historic resources on the property, on the parcel. And then they also have to show what they've done, that they've done as much as they can to preserve it, and be that through adaptive reuse, preservation, or other conservation. So this is another layer of protection in Frederick County for historic resources. So we're happy not only for, the forest and forest protections, but also for those true historic resources. But, I would argue that forests are also historic resources, but,
Well, yeah, and they're part of the cultural landscape.
Cultural landscape.
Speaking
Exactly.
of landscapes, you can kind of see the broad swath of the landscapes that as an organization we have covered. And these are just 3 projects, and there's probably a dozen more that we could talk about that the organization has engaged in or concluded or kicked off just in 2020. I also wanted to mention that for anybody listening or tuning in, do you tune into a Facebook Live? I don't know if you tune into that. But for anybody who's watching this, if you have questions, to feel free to put those questions in the comments, and we will do our best to answer those questions. So we've talked about all the happy stuff, and now we have to move to the sad things. And we're going to go back to Ellie again. So no rest for Ellie here right now. And the biggest losses of 2020. And we have to confine this just to preservation because obviously, we've lost, close to 300,000 American lives in the past year to a deadly virus and a pandemic. There's been something circulating on the internet about the deadliest days in American history. I think it's interesting, of course, that still the second on the list is the Battle of Antietam, where 3,300 people were lost in one day. But the rest of them are getting dangerously close, where we're losing 2,000 plus people a day over the past week. So it's important for us to put all of this in perspective and realize that nothing compares to the loss of human life. But our communities have been hit, and bad things have happened in 2020 as well to communities and preservation and quality of life. So when it comes to preservation, putting that on it and recognizing the importance of human life, what's your biggest loss this year, Ellie? What do you think that people should know about that has been a challenge for the preservation community?
Well, and I think this might be sort of the obvious one, but the losses to our historic main streets in terms of businesses, and the hit that cultural institutions have taken, museums. Maryland has an embarrassment of small museums, which is so fantastic. It really speaks to the passion Marylanders have for our history and the varied history that Maryland has. And I think, we're so lucky for that. And unfortunately, a lot of those museums that were already running, with volunteer help and things like that were really, really hit when there was the shutdown and the economic depression as a result of COVID-19. And so not only were you seeing businesses on historic main streets, restaurants, those types of things, but also museums really struggling to keep the lights on. And, there's always a silver lining. It was wonderful to see so many of these museums being able to pivot and utilize technology to do virtual tours or virtual happy hours to talk about their content. But, despite the perseverance, I think we can't ignore the hit that those institutions have taken and continue to hit as we enter into, I won't even call it a second wave since it never really left, but we're heading into a winter that's going to be very tough with these museums that rely really heavily on field trips and summer vacation, heritage tourism. So it's a year lost of that. So anybody listening, support your local museum. There's a charitable donation deduction available on your taxes. Right. Preservation Maryland or your local museum, I'm sure would really appreciate anything that you can give. The same thing with eating out when you can for carry out, because that's another industry that is so important to Maryland historically, our foodways, things like that. And so, you know, it hits all lines on the supply chain, from the watermen, which is obviously a very historic occupation in Maryland, you know, through up to just the owners of restaurants down the street from you. So yes, that I think would be our ongoing loss this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's well said, and you're right about hitting every line of the supply chain. I hadn't even really thought of it that way, but yeah, buy your oysters and tip your servers, even if you're doing takeout. Don't be cheap.
Yes.
And yeah, it's obviously hit communities very hard. So I'm gonna take the next one. You could pick a lot of buildings that have come down, and I know Megan and I are both going to go brick and mortar on everyone here for a second. And I'm going to call out the Baltimore Jail as a loss. And I do that not only because I think there's significant architecture there, and there was something lost that could have been repurposed. So I think it's a loss for adaptive reuse and repurposement. But I also think it's a loss for the city. Now, I'm not a resident of the city of Baltimore, so I can't speak with authority on city planning issues and things like that. But having spoken with many people in the city and been able to engage with a variety of people on this topic who care deeply about it and cared deeply about it before it was pulverized into rubble, is that the jail sits at a point where it creates this sort of gash in the city. And it is not you talk about, Megan was talking earlier about place and the power of place and the value of place. Well, there can be negative places too that are difficult to make your way through. Think about trying to walk down the side of an interstate, not really a hospitable walking place, right? Well, trying to traverse the correctional complex, move from one neighborhood to the next, it's an impediment, it's a barrier. And it was an opportunity, I think, a missed opportunity, where historic rehab could have re-knit together parts of the community that were sort of have this very cold stone barrier between them. And instead, we're going to see a new correctional complex eventually go up. But I do think it was a missed opportunity. And I know there were a lot of voices in the Baltimore space calling for its repurposement. And there's a lot of voices on the other side saying, we don't want this, and that there's a lot of really intense, negative, difficult history associated with mass incarceration of African Americans and all the other things that place represented. But I think there was a big opportunity there that was missed, and hate to see it now just sitting at the bottom of a landfill somewhere. So that's my sad, depressing loss of the year. Megan, do you have something sad and equally depressing?
Most preservationists do. You gotta keep track of the losses. So sometimes you can learn a lot from them, and so that's good perspective on obviously Ellie's example and Nick's example too. So the one that still stings, a loss that we've had in Prince George's and Hyattsville that still stings me is the demolition of the Wssc building, right off of kind of that heart of Hyattsville area, where if you know where Pyramid Atlantic is, or you know where Franklin's Brewery is, very cool stuff, or Artifact Coffee in Hyattsville, just in a couple bike shops, just cool stuff down there on Route 1 in Prince George's. There was a Wssc building, so an Art Deco utility building, a sewer and sanitation building, but it was originally from the 30s, and then it had a very cool, highly detailed mid-century edition, which had some really just expressive work, metal work, just kind of a very interesting building that was on this triangular lot that kind of grew over time. Ellie and I got to tour it when we did a mid-century tour a couple years ago, and it's been kind of on our radar for a while. And I was able to work with some very active, smart, local preservationists. I don't even know if they'd call themselves preservationists, but truly just great civic-minded folks who saw the potential in the structure, and also in the demolition of it and what that would mean for development around it. So Hyattsville is becoming like a high growth area. There's been a lot of new developments there. And so I think it really would have been an opportunity to kind of highlight Hyattsville because it was a utility structure and how a lot of utilities were out in the counties and things like that. So it's just a very interesting, unique building. And one side story of it is we think through some archaeology that the park immediately adjacent to it, which could have been kind of part of the reuse, kind of a gateway type planning concept, very well may have been where the couriers to Congress, some wonderful suffragists came down on their way to DC and had a rally with these like extremely decorated cars in 1913. So, you know, there's always layers of history, which is part of this conversation. It's just really just one of those shake your head moments. It wasn't a huge, it was a large structure. It wasn't huge. The asbestos had already been abated. There were definitely some things on the pro side, right? And it's just a shake your head moment, why it was a loss. But I guess it speaks to the need for taking a closer look at our mid-century structures, taking a look at our suburban structures and utilities and things like that, and incentivizing reuse of mid-century structures, or just continuing to pull developers into the reuse game and making sure that there's incentives and opportunities for them to kind of do right by the structures. And so I think it's a loss, and like anything, we can learn from it, and is an opportunity for us to really start to dig into mid-century structures.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point, and I think too that like they're being disproportionately lost probably compared to other periods of history at this point. And I think it's just because a lot of people don't even perceive them as historic. That's a big hurdle we have to overcome, particularly with such a huge amount of mid-century building stock in particularly the DC inner ring suburbs. So we're done with the really sad stuff. Now we're gonna move on to what we're looking forward to in 2021. So we'll get it out of the way. We're looking forward to the end of a pandemic. We're looking forward to getting the vaccine. We are looking forward to scientists bringing us back to some salvation and some sanity, and appreciate all of that work that's going into it right now. But what are we looking forward to? So I think I'm supposed to lead off here, and I couldn't pick just one, so I'm picking two, which is I am excited about our historic trades program. So we haven't really mentioned it. It could have been a success. It is a top story, but saved it for what we're excited for 21. We have a partnership with the National Park Service's Historic Preservation Training Center, which is based in Frederick, Maryland. And we are partnering with them cooperatively over the next year and beyond to try and not only get more people into historic trades through their traditional trades apprenticeship program, and recruiting for that. And you can find out more about that at historictrades.org, which currently redirects to a part of our website, but soon, very soon, too soon, will go to its own website. But because of the pandemic, we had to stop and sit and think, okay, well, we can't put people in the field. What are we going to do? And so me and Moss Rudley, the superintendent, and just one of our best partners and our best friends, sat down and sort of thought through, like, well, what are the systemic barriers to all this? What's stopping us from training tens of thousands of historic tradespeople every year? And the big challenge is we don't have a federally registered apprenticeship. So we said, well, why don't we do that? And at the same time, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation put together a policy statement that Moss and I helped with, that really encourages the federal government to invest in this kind of work. And so what we're going to do over the next year is we're going to do a first of its kind landscape survey of all trades training across the country. We are going to try and work to put together an open source curriculum that anybody can pick up and use that will then align with federally recognized Department of Labor apprenticeship standards, and perhaps actually, hopefully, federal apprenticeships for various historic trades, which should open up millions of dollars of potential funding for organizations, institutions, companies all across the country to do this kind of training work. So it's been something that has been, I mean, Moss and I went back through the work, and found that people were talking about this as early as the 1960s, 1950s, and it's 2021, so we're going to get around to it. And I'm thrilled about it. We've hired somebody who we're going to announce soon to really lead this effort on behalf of Preservation Maryland. We hope to continue to build out the apprenticeship component. We're looking to build out our own core function so that we can actually place trainees on projects in parks and beyond. There's just a lot of energy and momentum behind this. So that's my one thing that I'm looking forward to. And I'm looking forward to a lot of things. But of course, I have to also get a plug in here somewhere. I appreciate Megan at one point said something, but PreserveCast, we've got season 4 coming up. And I know everybody, it's sort of like, we're like your preservation Netflix. We're on demand anytime you need us. And this year I was crazy enough at the beginning of the pandemic to say, for the rest of this work from home thing for the pandemic, I'll just do it weekly. And then that never ended. So I've been doing it weekly ever since. So we're up to, I think we're about to record our 164th episode. Tune in, we're going to stick to weekly because we're just crazy enough to do it. And we're looking at talking to as many diverse people and backgrounds and stories and projects, not only here in the United States, but all across the globe. And we're going to try and do a little focus on some international preservation as well in the coming year. So tune in.
And if you don't listen to podcasts,
yes.
like if you don't subscribe to them, you just got to go to preservecast.org and everything is laid out there. So if you missed an episode that you were really interested in, or you want to share it with, classmates or colleagues, it's all right there. So 155, I think, maybe 56 episodes right there. So that's no joke, the amount of really thoughtful work and conversations that Nick's had with hundreds of people on the podcast.
Can't get enough of this voice right now. There's hundreds of I'm going to go to Ellie next. Ellie.
Okay. I'm really looking forward to session. The annual session of the Maryland General Assembly is set to start in the second week of January and run for 90 days. In 2020, session ended early for the first time since the Civil War. So certainly unprecedented. So even though it's definitely not going to look the same in January 2021, they've taken safety very seriously. So most of it will be done virtually, especially, for those of us on the lobbying advocacy side. But I'm excited to get back in the swing of things. We're going to be announcing a new addition to our advocacy department and advocacy associates. So we'll be announcing that hire shortly. And I'm looking forward to working with them on a number of issues. Sort of the beating the same drum of the historic tax credit, which is, in my mind, the best way to affect as many historic buildings positively as possible. Bricks and mortar are fantastic, in my mind, but that's one at a time. And with things like policy, like the historic tax credit, you're able to help save thousands of historic structures across the state. So this year, we're going to be really focusing our efforts in replenishing the small commercial tax credit program. The state historic tax credit has 3 components: large competitive commercial, which are the larger buildings that you probably recognize, American Brewery, really large scale. Then you also have the residential. So if you own a historic home, you can apply for the historic tax credit to help with the cost of rehabbing your home. And then there's the small commercial for those smaller Main Street commercial structures. And I think, if you've heard anything from me tonight, it's that Main Street needs our help. So, but it's also, you know, for smaller developers too. Last year we were actually, what was it, 2 years ago now, we were successful in expanding what qualified for small commercial, for the small commercial credit to include row houses. So I know in Baltimore City, small developers have been able to utilize that credit to take on, you know, blocks of row houses. So that's been really helpful in terms of community development. And it allows, you know, people who might not necessarily get into the, you know, or be able to get into the larger historic rehabs to try their hand at some historic rehabilitation work. So we'll be working to replenish that fund there. Also, we're working with a number of our environmental colleagues. We'll be supporting a number of environmental pieces of policy, including a climate omnibus bill that will be going through, which has one of, I think, my favorite little pieces in it, which is 5 million trees. So over 10 years, 50,000 trees to be planted in urban environmental justice census tracts, which I think is really cool. And it also brings the state up to 60% below 2006 levels of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and net neutral by 2045. So it would really bring Maryland into the forefront of being a green state. And then also working on protecting funding for program open space, which is a huge silent component of so much of the work that we do. And I think really the pandemic has highlighted the importance of open space. Park usage in Maryland alone was up 144% this year, according to a Google survey. You know, I don't even know how they collect all of it, but
data. They just collect it on you. You don't even know.
Yeah, I mean, I do. It's like I've got Google everywhere, but up 144%. And so program open space, it actually comes from the real estate transfer tax. So 0.5% from any time real estate is sold goes into into program open space, which funds a wide variety of programs, everything from acquisition of land for state and local parks to the Rural Legacy Program, which is a land conservation program that works all across the state, to the Maryland Heritage Areas, who help promote cultural heritage tourism across the 13 heritage areas that touch all parts of the state. It's a huge economic driver from outdoor recreation to that heritage tourism. So funding for this program is essential. And unfortunately, throughout the years, it has historically been rated in times of fiscal need or also in times of not so fiscal need. But it is an attractive pot of money that, you know, I think we need to be proactively protecting, because it's not like it doesn't have a use just because it's there. Land acquisition does take time. Deals like this take time. So I think, you know, with the pandemic, we know that more open space is better for all Marylanders, and making sure that we retain that and continue to invest in that for present Marylanders and future Marylanders. So that program open space will be high on our list this session. And also, I should say, every year we host our Maryland History Advocacy Day in Annapolis, where we bring hundred people to Annapolis to go meet with your legislators, Unfortunately, this year that is not going to happen in person, but you will be hearing from us about a virtual Maryland History Day. So hopefully, those of you who've not been able to join us because of travel issues or work, not being able to take the day, maybe you'll be able to participate this year. So please keep an eye out. Make sure, like Megan had said, make sure you're signed up for our email list so that you can participate this year. So that's what I'm looking forward to. Megan?
Well, there's just a few things, right? Yeah, just a few going on there. So
don't give me a platform. I'm ready to go.
What are you looking forward to in 2021 here?
Well, I want to give kudos to Ellie for her work. I think she said something that these programs are silent, and there's so much goes on the day-to-day in advocacy that Ellie and Preservation Maryland and all of us really are doing. So it's definitely worth the airtime for folks to understand all that goes into it on the everyday. I will focus a bit on a project that we're working on about the Underground Railroad, the reverse Underground Railroad, and what are called sites of self-emancipation, because we know that there's a storied legacy of slavery in Maryland, a very complex story, both triumphs, with the successful escapes, certainly from Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, and for those people who didn't, for whom the stars didn't align. We have an incredible opportunity for us all to learn from authentic places. So Preservation Maryland is partnering with the Maryland State Archives and the Department of Tourism to do two things, which is one, really traditional research to add sites, historical research to add sites to the Network to Freedom, which is a National Park Service program, which once you're listed, the sites would be eligible for additional support and funding and tourism opportunities in terms of helping get the word out. So that's very traditional heritage tourism. And then one other cool thing we're doing is we got a grant from the National Trust for Historic Preservation to bring a team from the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training, which is an NPS unit, which is based in Louisiana. And they'll be coming up this spring to the Eastern Shore to be doing some laser scanning of extant sites that we know of related to the Underground Railroad. So we're working on that list of what properties will be included. We hope to have a public day. I know we're all just excited to see what laser scanning entails and how it works, and to kind of experience that new approach to preservation documentation. And then, of course, we're excited to then share the research and the documentation with the property owners, with state agencies. And so it all becomes part of the historic record.
Good stuff. 3, 4, I guess, actually exciting things on the horizon, and many more. And we'll give one more shameless plug for signing up for our info. Hey, maybe even making a year-end contribution, then we'll never let you go.
Or we will if you want us to,
and you would get our printed quarterly newsletter, which goes into great detail on all of this stuff and is of benefit as a member. So we've got just a few minutes left here. We're gonna try and wrap this in a couple minutes here, but maybe we'll take this next one sort of a quick blow from each of us, which is biggest national preservation story. What caught our attention this year? So in a couple sentences or less, what was of greatest interest to you at the national level when it came to preservation and heritage and things like that? And I think Ellie's up first.
Okay. I would say the passage of the Great American Outdoors Act, which represents the greatest federal investment in the protection of historic and natural resources in 60 years. That money is going to fully and permanently fund the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which some of that money will go towards acquisition of historic sites and land through the National Park Service and the American Battlefield Protection Program. And then also it is going to fund a National Parks Public Land Legacy Restoration Fund, which will address the backlog, the maintenance backlog throughout the national park system, which nearly half, over half, are historic resources. So that was really exciting, and it took a lot of effort from all of our colleagues across the country to get that across the finish line. So that was pretty big.
Well, Ellie stole mine, but like no, it's fine. It's fine. Like the Boy Scout, I never was. I'm always prepared, and I have a good one. And
is it Newtown?
No, it's not Newtown. This one comes out of left field, and for some, but the Artemis Accords were signed this year. And the Artemis Accords are an international agreement. And actually, I'm glad you said Great American Outdoors, because I don't think the Artemis Accords have been brought up, and I'm excited to bring them up. But our friends at For All Moonkind have been promoting this.
That's where I learned about it.
Yes, and
it sounded familiar.
Yes, and the Artemis Accords included for the first time in an international space treaty a focus and an intention on preserving lunar history. And so we did an entire podcast with our friends at For All Moonkind that you can listen to. We also did a session of our virtual conference this year with them. And I think it's one small step for preservation, but one giant leap for the preservation community, if you will. Anyway, I'm excited about that. And I think that our friends at For All Moonkind have done some really, really great work. So, Megan.
I'll go really fast, I think. So 2 things, which is I loved how museums and culture institutions made great use of every digital tool available and are still making use of that. And as much as they're wonderful, there is truly, in my eyes, and I think people feel this because we can't go to them, no substitute for wonderful open museums, historic sites to walk around, in places to experience. So I think as well as everybody's doing with the change, I think it puts a fine point on how important they are in our lives.
Absolutely. Nothing makes the power of place like Zoom.
Where am I?
So this is our true parting shot. What was your favorite historic place or site that you visited this year? Now, Ellie's been to a place twice that is very near and dear to my heart. I'm curious if she'll say it, but we'll find out.
Well, I could do mine quick. So along with what I said about the power of place, I've been spending a lot more time at home. Definitely had like light bulb moments where walking trails that I didn't know about met up in my neighborhood, which I just hadn't explored in the last couple of years. And I will give a shout out to the friends of the Wyman Park Dell here in Baltimore who brought some goats over to the Dell. Great fanfare in the neighborhood. It was a very special day to deal with some undergrowth and overgrowth in a well-used city park. So kudos to them.
More goats in 2021. Ellie, what was your favorite?
Now I'm like scratching. It's like, where did I go? I would say I have 2 quick ones. The first is that I went out to the War Correspondence Arch is that it? Yeah. Well, and I was able to, that's one of my favorite places in Maryland, and I was able to finally bring my husband there. I've gone for work.
Burkittsville, for people listening.
To Burkittsville, yeah. Yep. So that was a lot of fun. And then also I would say the bunkers in Henlopen State Park in Delaware, and the bike path there, that just, again, being stuck inside for so long, it just was really nice to be able to enjoy that and to see what other states do with their state parks. And now it's like, it's going, the president-elect's bike loop. So, who knows if I'll be able to get back there.
Exactly.
Maybe you'll see him on the trail.
Maybe, yeah right.
Hello for all of
Ring
us.
my bell.
and And since you brought up President-elect Biden, I will mention that we have already submitted our letter to the presidential transition team about national parks and preservation and historic maintenance, and our desire to see historic trades as a component of building back better under the new administration. So we're ever forward, always looking forward. So I guess I'll wrap up. We're at 7:01, which for three preservationists who can all talk for a long time, I think we're doing pretty good. My favorite historic place this year, so there's been a group of them. So at the beginning of this, again, sort of like my ill-fated preserve cast idea that I was going to do weekly until we came back to the office. I thought, I'll take my daughter who's 4. Every weekend we'll go to a different battlefield or something. Well, we ran out of them pretty quickly, but we just kept going because it was nice to get out of the house, and it gave my wife a break from both of us, let's be honest. And it was a beautiful thing and a fun thing to bond with, and got my daughter out to see nature and parks and learn about history and think about things and prompt questions that otherwise wouldn't have happened. And I can report that on her 4th birthday, she asked if we said we can go wherever you want. I mean, within reason, not inside of a restaurant, but wherever you want, we'll take you. And she said, I want to go to Antietam. I want to show Mama Antietam. And I was like, okay, we can definitely do that. So we put our feet in Antietam Creek, and we showed her all of our favorite places. And it is that sense of, we've hit on this several times, the role of people in these places, the idea of a future. And I've seen all of that through my daughter's eyes, and been able to re-experience place, think about the future, think about her future, think about the role of these places when it comes to just being able to get out and breathe deep and stretch your legs. And proud of the role that we as an organization and that people like Ellie and Megan are playing in protecting, preserving, interpreting, enhancing, commemorating, celebrating, restoring, revitalizing places like this that matter. And if you're listening and you feel as we do, that these places matter, and that you want to help invest in their future, we hope that you'll make a year-end gift to Preservation Maryland. You can go to presmd.org and click on the donate button, and any gift will help. So thank you all for joining us. For those of you who tuned in, if you can tune in to a Zoom on Facebook Live. And thank you to my colleagues, Megan and Ellie, not only for joining me tonight, but for all the service and support and effort and energy you put into your work of saving the places that make Maryland unique. Thanks.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.